Tonight we are live from London, Scotland, Kazakhstan and Cyprus. Welcome to StockBox Premiere. Well, joining us on the panel tonight we have Nick Tulloch and Mike Whitlow from ECR Minerals, that's the ticker ECR, where we're talking about the new management and focus of activities within their gold project portfolio. Alex Walker, the CEO of East Star Resources, that's the ticker EST, talking about their Rudny Altai copper gold VMS project in Kazakhstan. And Oliver Friesen, CEO of Golden Metal Resources, that's the ticker GMET, where we're going to be talking about their tungsten and gold projects in North America. So the usual format, if you're a regular, you know it by now, we'll begin with a 10 to 15 minute interview, followed by the open Q&A session for 15 minutes, which is of course our audience's chance to put your questions to the director speaking using the live chat. So please do join in the conversation by using the YouTube live chat or hashtag StockBoxPremiere over there on Twitter. And please also hit that like or subscribe button if you are enjoying the show tonight. And as always, the directors are bound by market rules, but they will do their very best to answer your questions as best they can. Well, to kick us off tonight, let's welcome our first guest. That is Nick Tulloch and Mike Whitlow from ECR Minerals. Good evening to you, gentlemen. Welcome onto StockBox Premiere. How are you doing?
Very well. Good evening. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. Good evening. Thanks for having us, Mark. Great to be here.
It's great to be talking to you both this evening. Of course, we saw you in Mines and Money, Resourcing Tomorrow, didn't we? Only last week. So, I mean, let's just start on that. How did you find that? I know it's both your first two times being at that show. So, how was it?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was great. Apologies, Nick, just kind of jumped straight in. I thought it was fantastic, better than expected. I think we kind of went into it with an element of skepticism, predominantly because previous management had booked for us to be there, having attended the show last year. By the admission of many, including yourself, the footfall and the traffic had increased somewhat, and the meetings were good. So, yeah, superb. Really enjoyed it.
Nick, do you echo Mike's comments?
I do. We think alike. It was very good. There was never really a moment where we were sitting staring at each other in the booth. We were always busy. There were people coming to see us. Both people were booked and people just dropped in. So good conversations and plenty of follow up.
Yes, well, I picked up on the same thing. Lots of interest there. I think people's diaries were pretty packed. Of course, the big chat of the few days was uranium and, of course, gold, given the price performance there. So quite poignant that you, as a mainly gold-focused company, were there. But let's get on to talking about ECR Minerals then, where you do have a lot of gold projects, mainly focused in Australia. Of course, the company recently underwent a change of management with Nick Tulloch there being appointed as CEO, as well as well-known Mike Whitlow there as COO. And the board of directors undertook a full review of all the projects and implemented a performance-based remuneration package and plans to give investors what they want through success on the drill bit. I think that's your words there, Mike. So to start us off, I wonder if perhaps we can talk around Kresik, for example. So could you take us through the Kresik project, the past work that ECR have carried out on it, and why it's a big focus for you right now?
Sure. Nick, do you want to jump straight in, or do you want me to keep going?
No, you go first, Mike, and then I'll pick up.
Yeah. All right. Apologies. Yeah. I mean, look, Kresik as an asset was something that I'd been with the company for a little while. A lot of work had been spent on that particular asset, and the company had raised a substantial amount of money historically for the project. We'd spent a fair bit of money in Victoria across our entire portfolio there of assets, and I think after COVID, it became particularly difficult to get into Australia, and more so, it was difficult to get into Victoria. A lot of drilling activities kind of ceased and came to a bit of an end, and from there on, I think the funding was routed into other projects for perhaps some of our peers. We've seen a fair bit of activity of late, and I'm sure we've kind of talked about this a lot with the recent results from Southern Cross Gold. We know that other of our peers are also active in country. Going back in time, we've done a number of different types of drill programs, from RC drilling and downhole bulk sampling to diamond drilling. The assets that we had, particularly at Baillieston and Creswick, had been with the company for quite some time. I think when Nick and I first came in, we questioned, quite why the company had almost used the diamond drill like a scattergun. There were 2 or 3 drill crews out at any one time, from our understanding, and there was a heap of activity around that period within the cycle of the company. And I think a lot of this now is becoming more obvious that those licenses need to have a minimum spend on the projects to get the licenses renewed, and that simply just hadn't been possible. So the management team felt at that time, and we believe so too, that these assets were extremely interesting, and therefore they wanted to fulfill that work commitment. And that's why the guys went out there and they were particularly active. And unfortunately, the results were quite a mixed bag. And I think when we look at where the share price was back then, at perhaps 3 or 4 pence, with a market cap of 20, 30, 40 million quid and 5 or 10 million quid in the bank, to where we are today, it's a very telling story. It's unfortunate. We had the passing of Craig Brown, who's the former CEO, and I think the company almost became a bit of a rudderless ship. And that's not a criticism to the existing board or even to historical management. I just think it's a number of different circumstances which left the company in a bit of a sticky wicket. And Nick and I came in, we've done a bit of a review. We believe that getting back out in the field is important. Lulworth's shaping up to be a great asset, and we'll talk about that shortly. But for us, I think it would be remiss at this stage for us to walk away, particularly given what we're seeing in and around that Victoria region, with the likes of Novo Resources, Vulcan Metals, and of course with the guys at Southern Cross Gold having some fantastic knockout the park results. So long-winded response, apologies, but I'll hand the mic over to yourself and Nick.
Well, Nick, do you want to add anything further to that?
No, I think, again, Mike has made all the key points. We've done what any new management team would do. We've looked carefully at the assets. We've identified those that we think merit further attention and what that further attention should be. We've identified an opportunity for a relatively modest cost drilling program, which we think can be quite high impact in terms of what potentially it can produce. The drilling program's covered by our existing resources. This is not a sort of a funding to go drilling. That's all covered already. It's something we think we can complete in relatively short order. There's still a few more preparations to go through, but we're optimistic this can be done in a reasonably near term. So it's the right thing to do to, as Mike says, just fully investigate the better assets we've got in the portfolio.
Okay, we're talking about the better assets, and when it comes to Lulworth over in Queensland, and of course the new licenses, can you give us a quick, perhaps, fly through of that area, what it's all about?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose one of the first sort of big decisions we took as a new team is that we abandoned an option that we had in a property called Hurricane up in the north of Queensland. Hurricane had a lot of interesting attributes, but I think what really put us off was the pricing, and we couldn't justify the value that was being paid. And also the impact that was likely to have on the company. On certain metrics, it could have been a reverse takeover, adding further cost, further process to proceeding with it. Instead, what we've done is we're in the process of licensing an area called Condapringa right next door. Very similar geology. We think some of the trends flow through, and rather than paying in the millions for Hurricane, we're paying in the thousands for Condapringa. So we think a much more effective use of shareholder funds. As for Lulworth, I think Mike touched on that earlier. There's been a fair amount of sampling, and investors will have seen a number of announcements that we've put out, even in the sort of short time that we've been running the company. And what we're seeing there is that the resource opportunity is looking more extensive than perhaps many people first thought. And I think when the company first got involved in Lulworth, there was maybe some question as to whether this was the right area. There's some very good neighbours in the not too distant area. But in terms of what we're finding, the results have been positive, and there's still more work to be done. It's still fairly early stage, but the extent of what we think we may have in Lulworth appears to be getting more certain as we go. So again, plenty to be done and plenty more work, but it's looking like a very, very interesting prospect.
Excellent. Mike, I know you sent me a map. Would you like me to bring that up and you can sort of take us through some of the areas?
Yeah, look, I think it's important, particularly Queensland, to kind of just highlight the scale and size of this particular project. I mean, it's well over 900 square kilometres. It's enormous. The Charters Towers district is pretty well known and regarded. And then you look at the Condapuringa asset, which borders with the Hodgkinson Gold fields as well, and again historically. I've been mineral-rich regions and had a whole bunch of different sort of deposits and in a variety of sizes, from sort of old-time prospectors to sort of people being out in the field now using more modern technologies and having a great success. So I think it's important for people to realise the size and scale of the opportunity in Queensland and the great progress that we've made so far. Unfortunately, as with many of our peers, we perhaps don't feel like we've had a bang for our buck for the results that we've actually delivered to market, but we'll continue chipping away at it, and there's additional news due. If you can put the map up, great. If you're unable to, it's not a great issue, but it just helps to highlight the area. And of course, I think with Victoria, it's a bit more poignant because you kind of see that postcode and the geological DNA that exists within the area that we're operating. And for us, and we'll talk about this, it's important that we have the structure of the business right, but it's also important that we're able to investigate the assets that we've got. And I think there's a belief from investors and shareholders we'd potentially come through the door, kick it off the hinges and introduce some new assets and forget all about what's actually under the hood. For me, and I think and hope Nick shares the same view, there's a fair bit to go at yet. We don't need to rush into anything just yet.
There's your slide there, so we can see where the. Maybe you can take us through it a little bit if you can see that, Mike.
Yeah. So this is Queensland, isn't it? That you've got up. So I don't actually have the map up. So I mean, there's a fair distance between Lulworth and Condapuringa. Probably, again, being British, we don't appreciate scale quite as much. But you can see sort of some of the projects that have been operating in and around the area. I can't get it up on the screen that I've got in front of me, sadly. I don't know if you're able to do so, Nick. If not, I can kind of ad lib.
No, I can sort of talk through some of it. So Condapuringa, that's the one at the very top. It's you'll see the ECR logo with the slightly sort of brownish colour around Condapuringa. So that is next door to what was the Hurricane project that was announced around about a year ago. Again, very extensive area, actually twice the size of Hurricane, very similar geology, beautiful part of the world up by sort of Port Douglas and Cairns. So for those who are interested in the Great Barrier Reef, just across the water from that. Lulworth is sort of near the top middle, blue logo. The blobs on the map, by the way, the sort of the oranges and the yellows, that represents historic gold production. So the darker the colour, the greater the production in the area. And I think for Lulworth, it illustrates quite neatly that you can see that the locality, and again, I mean, so using locality in the Australian method rather than the British method, the locality has got some extremely interesting history and some quite illustrious neighbours. Mike mentioned Charters Towers already. So I mean, that's been a big interest in Lulworth, and just as Mike said, the scale of it and some of the results we're getting have really stood out. We haven't really touched on it, but Blue Mountain is I suppose a more recent acquisition from around about a year ago, and that's sort of down near the middle right, somewhere between sort of Rockhampton and Brisbane.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you for taking us through that. Is it worth putting up the Victoria one as well, do you think, just for a couple of minutes, just to...
If possible, if we've got a moment, it'd be well worth a look.
Yeah, there we go, there's Victoria, yeah.
Same principle here, the darker the blob, or the more orange the blob, the greater the historic gold production. So of the three projects here, we mentioned Creswick, so over on the sort of the middle left in the Ballarat area. And again, the sort of the darkness of the orange where Creswick is, I suppose, illustrates what's gone on in the area. Probably worth touching on Bendigo right at the very top. Fosterville South was an asset that actually ECR seeded some years ago to the now very well known site at Fosterville. So there's a little bit of heritage within the company. And then sort of moving to around the clock face a little bit to around about sort of 12 o'clock. Baillieston, sort of top middle. Again, some quite interesting neighbours. Mike mentioned Southern Cross and some of the activity they've had. Now, that's the more exciting announcements are down at Sunday Creek, so just south of Baillieston. But they also have two joint ventures at Rue and Redcastle, just sort of due north and due east of where we are in Baillieston. And again, as Mike said, Baillieston and Creswick are both assets that have sat with the company for a while. And then thirdly, just over on the sort of the far right, sort of I guess sort of 3 o'clock on the clock face, you would have is the Tambo Gold Project. So 3 projects in each state. Creswick is where our main focus is just now in Victoria, and Lulworth has been the main focus in Queensland.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for that. Sorry, that's just an echo coming through there. I wonder, it's nearly time to go to the live questions, but before we get into that, I just want to pick up on something that I know is very important for both of you there. You've spoken many times since taking office about the salary sacrifice and being rewarded on the same terms as shareholders. So why do you both feel so strongly about this? Mike, do you want to take the lead on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to set an example, and that's always got to be the case with leadership, right? And I think we're in a pretty depressed market. We've seen a lot of beaten up companies, and I think we're in a great position where Nick and I have got extreme confidence in our ability. We think the company looks cheap. I'm not in a position to comment too much on valuations of businesses. It's always the classic line: you spend too much time focusing on it, you can start to steer people. So we're not in a position to do that. I don't really want to get into it too deeply, but I think for us, it's about coming in, being aligned with shareholders, making sure that there's a metric in place or a floor. And if you're not able to achieve something that's considered success, then you shouldn't really be rewarded for failure. And we often see that with many of these the companies that are listed in the junior markets. And we were in a great position to be able to do that, and we elected to do it. And what's even more encouraging is the board of directors have supported us in the first quarter and have continued to extend that into the second quarter. I don't think there's ever been a history in the company's life cycle of 19 years where a management team and the board of directors have done what we're doing. And there's probably a small percentage of companies that are out there in the market or have been out there in the history of the junior markets in AIM or in the UK over the last sort of 20 years that have actually taken the same initiative. So look, we're confident. The board are confident. We know what shareholders want, and we hope that we'll be able to deliver it. And if we can't deliver it, we don't expect to get rewarded handsomely for failing.
Excellent. Nick, do you want to add to that? I think that pretty much sums up the strategy quite well.
Yeah, I don't want to sort of bore and keep agreeing with Mike, but it's hard to say anything different. We've both been in the market for quite some time. We understand what matters to shareholders. They want to see an improving company. They want to see an improving share price. And if we're the guys to steer ECR to the next level, I think it's right and proper that we make the offer that we'll be rewarded alongside shareholders. And it's probably important to emphasise we made this proposal to the board. It wasn't the other way around. We felt very strongly that we should be rewarded based on the success we can achieve for the company. And hopefully that's a testament to what we think we can do and the value we think lies within the portfolio.
Great. Okay. Well, we are definitely in time for the open Q&A. So I'd encourage anyone watching, anyone has any questions, to drop in your questions. I do want to pick up on something, Mike, that you said right at the start, just on Creswick. Is it fair to say that you almost alluded to the fact that perhaps the company lost its way perhaps a little bit, and Creswick has a lot of potential, but perhaps due to COVID and not being able to get access, that kind of thing, it kind of lost its way a little bit, and you've actually managed to get a modest cost, but hopefully a high impact program plan. So there's kind of two questions there. First of all, do you agree on the it's losing its way, but it's got a lot of potential? And secondly, how are you getting this modest cost, high impact drill program? What's gone into planning this?
It's quite straightforward. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. The company in 2019 had a heap of success doing exactly what we're intended to do now. And if people kind of say, a bit convenient that might to say it, go and look at Falcon Metals. They did exactly the same thing at around about the same time and had the same success. They then did a similar thing and went and used the diamond drill a little bit too liberally, and they didn't have as much success with their diamond campaign or with their extended drill campaign, should we say? So, we think that it's the right way to go. We can chalk up some runs pretty easily, and this is the technical director's stomping ground. He's been prospecting and scratching around in Creswick since he was 13, 14 years old, and a budding geologist. And the guy's been at it for over 25 plus years now, and we would say that knowing what's going on in your own backyard is a lot easier than knowing what's going on in your neighbours. So for us, we're in the right place. A lot of these technical guys and geologists, particularly in this region, they've all worked with each other for other companies. There's a rich history. There's a lot of communication. They're speaking to there's still people out there that are metal detecting. There's still people out there prospecting. This is sort of old world and new world colliding. It's people that still pan for gold in certain parts of the world as well. So, all of this knowledge is powerful, and we think that trying to get the most out of it is important. And for us, it's about getting into our own backyard. And if we don't get the results, then we won't spend too much money. And if we start hitting some decent grade, which we have done in the past, and we hope that the market then starts to believe in what we're telling them, then we can expand upon that and build from there.
Okay, and you're hoping to announce this drill program soon?
We indicated to the market that we would be doing it pretty imminently, but it's like with all of these things, you better to be there and in the field and doing the job than talking about it, too much. But I think that the company will make an announcement in due course when we're in a position to do so.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Let's see what questions we have coming in. Here's one. So, what, if anything, have you been surprised about from your first few months at ECR? Nick, you can answer that one, Nick.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think we've done what you'd expect any new management team to do. We've spent time looking at the assets. We've spent time looking at the cost base. We've spent time getting to understand the people. I think what we've found is that there's a lot of value in the assets. I mean, I wouldn't say that's necessarily a surprise. I think that's what we believed on the way in. But hopefully it's evident from the announcements we put out that we think there's a lot more to go for on the assets. I think in terms of how the company's run, I've got a sort of a background in law and finance. I'm a bit of a stickler for detail and for cost. And my immediate reaction on looking at almost every single company I come across is there must be a way of shaving something off the cost base. And I think that's absolutely the case with ECR. This is not a sort of an advert to say we're sort of taking a hatchet to people and taking a hatchet to the operations. It's just about doing things more efficiently. And bit by bit, I think that's going to come through. But in terms of surprises, I think we've pretty much seen what we thought we were going to see. We knew there was a job to be done. We knew we weren't getting something that was perfectly packaged and so beautifully wrapped up with a bow on top. And as we've got into it and understood what we have, I think there have been some things that are probably slightly better than expected. Some things that probably need a bit more work. But overall, I think this is the package we expected to receive.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. It's good to hear there's no nasty surprises there because, once you get your feet under the table, they can definitely pop out. So let's see any more questions. We've got a few minutes left. Will either or both of you be travelling to Australia in the near term to visit the sites?
Yes. I mean, it's important to get out there. So it's a yes. I think both of us, for different reasons, have got some quite busy calendars. I don't have an exact date in mind, but I would hope that within the next couple of months, I would be out there. And this sort of follows on from what I was saying a moment ago. It's about understanding how the business operates. And there's only so much you can do on email and spreadsheets. Actually, you need to get out and see the sites, meet the people, and understand and see what we've actually got on the ground.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Is the company...
I just want to chip, Mark, if you don't mind, I just want to chip in briefly. I mean, I think there's a perception here as well. Is, I think we've moved on. The world's moved on. Nick and I speak every day. We're on video most days. We speak with the board frequently as a collective, and then we speak with different members of the board depending on what subject matter it might be on a one-to-one basis too. So, I think getting to know the team, of course, you want to look into the whites of the eyes of the guys that you're working with, and that's going to happen, rightly so. But it's also important to sort of make sure there's no misconception here that we don't know who we're dealing with. We've got no idea of one another's traits and personalities. We've got a good idea. We've had some interesting dialogue today, and it's been extremely useful.
Okay, good to hear. So the next question I saw popped up there: is the company only focused on Australia as a jurisdiction, or do you foresee a time where you might look to another recognised jurisdiction? I know you've of course got the Philippines as well. That's that legacy asset.
Yeah, we do. There's an asset in the Philippines. There's a royalty over in South America. I mean, the short answer is Australia is where it's at. We've got a handful in terms of assets to examine and to work with in Australia. But at the same time, we're both open-minded people, and if we were presented with something that was interesting, it was sat outside Australia, or even sat outside the regions where we were in Australia, it would be remiss of us not to look at it. But we are not scouring the world looking for opportunities outside of Australia, but we will be open-minded to ensure we get best value for shareholders. And going back to one of the earlier questions, we are about to become shareholders ourselves. So the performance of the company, whether it's Australia or elsewhere, is clearly paramount in our own importance.
First time being an ECR shareholder, Nick, will it be?
For me, it will be, yes.
Okay, Mike?
And it definitely won't be for me, Mark. No. I mean, I've been involved with ECR on and off well over a decade or more, and it's been good. It's been good to me. I'll be honest with you. I made quite a lot of money on that sort of Victoria gold boom that took place the last time, and I was fortunate enough to be in a position where I had quite a decent option package, a warrant package for shares that I bought. So it was a great place to be. It's been kind to me. Hoping it can be kind to me and shareholders again. And if we can't move the needle from here, we can't make it work. We probably shouldn't be in the job. And I hope more people take a little bit of inspiration from the way that Nick and I are approaching it, and hopefully shareholders eventually will start to see that we don't just say it, we do it, and we mean it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all about timing, isn't it? This is the other question come up. I'll just ask this question, then I'll come back on that point. What is the primary project you'll be focused on, if there is one, and why?
Well, look, I think we have historically been focused very much in Victoria, and Queensland was a direction that the company went in a couple of years ago. The technical director had spent quite a bit of time up there. He was interested in Lulworth, and it's grown, and it's grown for a number of reasons. I think it's grown because it had to. It wasn't an easy place to operate, Victoria, for a little while. And, they had all sorts of problems as well with entering the area, getting results back. And it shaped up and it looked really nice. So I think for us, it's hard to say which is the flagship of the business, because Southern Cross Gold have blown it out the water, haven't they, with their recent announcements? And they continue to put out positive after positive announcement. So that whole area is building a real buzz about it. But for us, we're overwhelmed with the results that we've had from Lulworth as well.
Great. Okay, well, we're nearly up on time, but I just want to come back to something I was just going to pick up on there about what you said about being a shareholder. I mean, ECR was my first mining stock that I ever bought quite a few years ago, and completely new into the mining space, and I did time it well, completely by luck, made some money, and then bye-bye, it all went when I didn't perhaps take profits when they were there. But I mean, I'm quite keen to see how you both do in ECR, because I obviously followed the story very closely for a number of years, and of course we've had ECR on StockBox over the last few years as well. But I mean, how do you feel in terms of, is it about timing the market? Do you think that's a real key thing here? And certainly given the price of gold, you can't time when you get a discovery, but you really, I think that's quite a big thing, isn't it? That the success of a company and the share price is what do you think?
Mike, the markets work in mysterious ways, don't they? And just when you've got that overkill of hype and excitement, it's probably the time to cash in your chips and walk away. And what you've got to be able to do is go completely against all of your gut feeling and your emotions, and you've got to be disciplined at that point. And that's just how markets work. And of course, when people sort of said, gold was finished, there'd be no more interest, in that, the story of wealth will be cryptocurrencies and all the, these non-fiat types of instruments that had been introduced to the world at that point. Gold was dead in the water, wasn't it? And well, what we're finding is during COVID, precious metals became of great interest. And what we're seeing again now more recently is exactly the same situation. So I would like to say I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer here, but I think, with my own success of being able to navigate markets and understand where we need to be, we're in a stronger position now than perhaps some of the previous management who've seen the dizzy heights, because expectations and the bar's been kind of set quite low for lots of these companies, and it shouldn't take a lot of raising. And I've had the privilege of meeting one of the guys that's coming in later on your show today, and I was immediately taken by Oliver. I think you've got a great guy there in golden metal, and I think they're in the right space too, and they're coming to the market with the right energy and attitude. So let's wait and see what the other guys have got to say and hear other opinion. But yeah, it's not an exact science, this market game, Matt.
Good. Well, nice to hear that, Mike. And yes, you're right. Tonight's show is very good. We've got you guys on. We've got Alex Walker up just in a few seconds. Another great CEO who's very much aligned with shareholders, and of course, Oliver Friesen. So I know it's late for you, Mike, but it's definitely later for poor Alex, who I'll bring in a second over in Kazakhstan. But if you can both stick around for an hour, if you can, that'll be great. Come back for the round table at the end. But for now, thank you both very much for your time. And I'd like to bring in Alex Walker, CEO of East Star Resources. Thank you so much, because I know it's 1:30 in the morning for you. It's Thursday morning for you, Alex. Alex, actually, I can't hear you. Hang on a second. Let me see if we can make sure you're unmuted.
No, that's me. Sorry.
There you go.
Yeah, I'll hopefully not speak too softly and try and wake the kids up. Thanks for having me, though.
Important, yeah. But how are you? Thank you for joining us at such a unsocial hour.
No, pleasure. Thanks very much for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Great, good. Well, of course, we've spoken a few times, and the company has a number of, you've got a rare earth project, but also gold projects or gold copper projects in Kazakhstan. But of course, your flagship is, and your current focus is your Rudny Altai VMS belt in northeastern Kazakhstan, which has had intense historic activity and many high-grade mines in current operation across the belt, and processing facilities as well. So you're definitely in a very prolific area for activity. But I wonder, just to start us off, because maybe not many people will be familiar with the company and the project, could you perhaps just introduce the company, but really focus on the flagship project, Rudny Altai project, what it's all about, and why you're so active there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again for having me. So the Rudny Altai belt is a volcanogenic massive sulfide belt. It's huge. It's the fourth most prolific production belt in the globe for VMS. Realistically, it could go a lot higher due to the lack of significant exploration when compared to all the other VMS belts globally. It's 800 kilometers long. It goes from Russia through Kazakhstan, Mongolia, and into China. And the Kazakhstan part is about 350 kilometers of that belt. So we've pegged 800 square kilometers, 803 square kilometers, and our neighbors are ECR Minerals and Glencore, basically. For those that aren't aware, ECR Minerals used to be listed on the London Stock Exchange and is pretty prolific. The three VMS producing assets that they've got today made about $380 million last year. So what you've got with these VMS belts is you've got highly clustered with frequent spatial periodicity for deposits. So it's the predictability of where these deposits should be. And that's exactly why we're there, because you've got a deposit and then 45 kilometers of nothing, and then 3 deposits and then 30 kilometers of nothing. And the nothing is just where there's cover. So we've pegged that cover. There's three deposits, 30 kilometers of cover we've pegged, and then another 3 or 4 deposits just to the southeast of our tenements. So it starts off with quite a simple concept, and then what you've got is just a stupid amount of historical data. And so we've spent the last couple of years finding, collecting, digitizing that data. One of the results of which, and there's a lot, and there'll be a lot more to talk about in the not too distant future, hopefully, but one of the major results of that data was basically the formation of a deposit. We've got a deposit called the Fakuba deposit. It's next to the town of Fukuba. We digitised 42,000 metres of historical drilling, which today to replicate would cost over $10 million for the drilling, let alone assays and all the other work behind it. And we gave that to an independent expert called AMC Consultants, very, very highly credentialed globally consultants. And they put a JORC exploration, well, they actually gave us a resource model, which we converted to a JORC exploration target for reporting purposes of 19 to 23 million tonnes at 1.4 to 1.9% copper equivalent. So that's around 300,000 tonnes of contained copper. Now, of that, about 5 to 6 million tonnes was in an open pit, again at about 1.5% copper equivalent. So we gave that to them, and with the concept being, is this worth drilling? The answer was pretty vehemently yes. It's something that we need to press on with. So we did. We focused on that very much so this year, and we've given a high level results of that to market, because we had results that went with the assay technique we used, stopped at 1% copper and 1% zinc. So we sent 62 samples back to the lab to get the plus 1% copper results, and we're hoping to release those to the market next week, in fact. Okay. And so what that is starting to demonstrate is that we unequivocally have a copper deposit. Now we need to start going through the early stages of JORC resource conversion and economic studies. So we're really, really excited by that. For us, it's absolutely game changing. You mentioned before we're in a rich region. It's not only the producing assets, but they're actually all underfed mills as well. So CAS Minerals mill Nikolovskoye is 52 kilometres by road, not by line of sight from the Fukuba deposit. That today has 600,000 tonnes of spare capacity, and we met with senior management last week to kick off an initial sort of conversations as to what that might start to look like if we do have a deposit that could feed that mill. We've got Glencore about 110 kilometres away with spare capacity in their processing plant. We have a smelter 70 kilometres away with spare capacity down in Usk-Gorsk, where there's an international airport. We already have road, water, power, rail, everything you can think of at site. So if we can get through the concept of converting this to a JORC resource and putting a scoping study / PEA on this in 2024, it's a very low threshold for economic development and a very, very fast potential development if we can get it there. So it's really, really exciting for us.
Because a lot of those sort of infrastructure things that we're taking into account on a study would already be taken care of, aren't they? As you just said, you've got the infrastructure there, you've got access there, and even processing facilities. So that would actually reduce the upfront cost and make the economics better, wouldn't it, for the project when you do these?
It's exactly right. I mean, if you're talking about a standard development, then you're saving, depending on where you are in the world, $5s or $10s of millions of dollars on your capex. But what's more important is just that optionality for us. So we're a small company, unjustifiably small, obviously, in my view, as all management will say. But you would have a look at something and say, well, how are you going to raise 100 million, 150 million to develop an asset like this? Well, we really probably don't have to. So AMC did an optimized pit study. I didn't ask them to. I think they just got a bit excited by the drill results. So they did an optimized pit study, and hence why they've put that open pit resource. They had a cutoff grade of 0.38% copper, which is very fair, by the way. Market users are, other players using sort of 0.1%. 0.38% is unbelievably conservative. So they put that on, gave that open pit, and then put an NPV using all of the royalties, expected production costs, and things like that, which again, were more than fair, and put a pre-capex, to be fair, pre-capex net present value of 242 million, which was pretty much a base to mid case. I said capex, I meant net present value, NPV, 242 million. So that's fine. It's pre-capex. What if it does cost $150 million to build the mill? Well, that's going to take some of that away. But in reality, if we're talking about a toll treatment or mine gate sale or something along those lines, well, yes, you're giving away a big chunk of the economics, but your capex isn't 150 million, it's 5 million or it's 10 million, because really all you're doing is the cutback. You're putting in a crusher and then you're seeing what you can upgrade it to before you truck it down the roads. That might be a dense media separator, it might be ore sorter, whatever the case may be. So really, really low sort of threshold to development, not the sort of thing you need to finance completely with equity as well. So that's really exciting. So even if you said, well, you're giving away half the economics, which you wouldn't be, but if you did, it's still got $120 million capex and a very, very $120 million MPV and a very achievable capex. Okay. So we're really excited by that.
And it's copper gold, isn't it? But is it the copper that you're going to be exploiting more, or is the gold got some good potential here as well?
Yeah, well, for the time being, I think we could probably call it copper zinc.
Okay.
Yes, but what we're hoping for is some precious metal credits. So before we drilled, and it's an important point, because the 1.4 to 1.9% copper equivalent that they put was based on copper, lead, zinc, because the historical drilling didn't assay for silver or gold. But we knew it was in the deposit because they did some metallurgical test work which had silver gold recoveries in it. And so if you thrash that out, you'd probably get a 30% uplift in the grade. But we have to see how that pans out. We did get silver credits in our drilling, which we've announced to the market. So there's definitely silver in there. We're waiting for the gold assays. So when you do assays, you do it through several iterations, but fire assay is done after ICP-MS. And so we're waiting for those gold results as well. I don't think we're going to have in the grams per ton, but nonetheless, it's going to be a real hopeful credit. So yeah, copper, zinc, silver, gold, I'm expecting.
Copper, zinc, silver, gold. Okay, fantastic. And you mentioned at the start, you mentioned CAS Minerals and Glencore. People were very familiar with Glencore. CAS Minerals, who are they? What's their significance?
Well, they used to be listed on the London Stock Exchange. So, multi-billion-dollar producer. They've got two of the biggest mines in Kazakhstan with Boshakol and Aktagai, giant porphyries. A real sort of credit to what you can build in Kazakhstan and how you can operate. Some good friends of mine here in Kaz, run some of the mines there, and they start off quite high grade and then sort of move down as they produce. But they're now producing as one of the lowest cost producers on the planet, which is at 0.3% copper. So that's a real testament to the operating costs here in Kazakhstan. But the East region assets is, I don't think they'd be too upset with me saying this, has been relatively speaking neglected, because they've got these giant porphyries that they have been building out with 40-year mine lives. And one of them, they're doing a feasibility study for its own smelter. So they haven't really done the exploration they need to keep the mine life going. And two of the mines that are very, very close to our operation actually have about less than a 5-year mine life. So I said that 600,000 tonnes of spare capacity today. Well, in the next 3 to 5 years, that's going to be significantly less as well. So it's a really, it's kind of an important point, because if you want to keep the region going, if you've got your liabilities in terms of staffing, in terms of your opportunity cost for not feeding mill, then actually, working with someone like us might make quite a lot of sense. So, there's no promises there to shareholders on that behalf, but sure. Certainly it does make a lot of sense to be having conversations with them.
Okay, and in terms of some of the recent activities then that you've been doing here, I mean, you mentioned there you've got perhaps results coming as soon as next week. Could you just perhaps tell us what the recent activity you've been doing, what its purpose is, and what these results will help enable you to do?
Sure. So we announced that exploration target in March of this year, 2023, and then we've spent the vast majority of this year working through that, as well as doing additional field work and firming up other targets. But we've been working through that. So the recent drilling that we did had the main purpose of validating the historical drilling. Okay. We've got very, very detailed information, right? Very detailed lithological columns for a lot of the drill results. We've been all over the resource in terms of our geological traverses and so on. But a lot of that happened post that post that resource announcement. So we did the resource. We've had to adjust the locations of the drill holes. We found 70 of the drill collars, 70 of the 97 which were utilised in that resource report. We did a detailed LiDAR topographical survey. So now whenever we update that resource, we'll have seriously good information for using geomorphology and being able to put out information about stripping grade, stripping ratios, and so on. Mm-hmm. And then we drilled, and so we've now got our own understanding of the lithological model and our own understanding of the grade profiles and how they might vary compared to that that model. So what happens is now we put out the drill results, the final drill results. We are undertaking a geostatistical analysis comparing them to the historical ones. My hope is that we can put a JORC resource on at least the open pit part from the drilling that we've done. So I've got to see how that plays out. It really depends on how the geostatistical analysis goes, but that would be great to see. A small, we'll see the size of it, but a JORC resource.
We'll see the size of it.
Yeah, exactly. And then from there we get to launch into scoping study PEA next year. So my expectation is we should be able to get inferred resource from about 120 meter spacing, maybe indicated from 50 to 60, and inferred would allow us to do a scoping study, indicated would allow us to do a PA, but we'd like to push it out as fast as humanly possible. So we'll see.
So I mean, in terms of the JORC, then when would you kind of want that early? It's sort of Q1 possible next year?
Potentially, yeah. If everything goes to plan, I'd say Q1. Otherwise, it'll happen, off the back of a couple more drill holes. But
sure. And then rapidly going through some of those studies during 24. Great. Okay.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. I mean, look, the drill pads are there. I mean, the rig's actually still sitting at site because it finished, at the end of winter and they didn't have another job to go to. So we can get them started very, very quickly. As soon as we're sort of ready to.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. Looking forward to maybe we'll be speaking next week on some of those results. Hopefully they are coming up and showing you, validating those historic results as you say. But we are on time now for the open Q&A, and I can see some questions have indeed come in. So first one here, will any further rounds of drilling be required in H124 to convert the Fukuba JORC target to a resource? You've kind of alluded to that, but maybe you want to just answer that one.
Yeah, well, so the answer is I can't definitively say yes or no at the moment, unfortunately. It really does depend on the analysis. What we did, so there is the drill results that we've got that went into the open pit concept was it was only drilled on one profile. So if we it is very possible that we could do a JORC resource on that, but I would say that it would be definitely more drilling will be required to convert it with a stronger degree of confidence.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. In an RNS, you have a reference, a potentially game-changing copper deposit at Fukuba. Can you explain why it might be transformational to East Star?
Well, because we'll have a copper deposit. We go from being an explorer, with that's looking for the asset that you want to get into production to a company that has the asset that you want to get into production. My view is it's already been game changing. It's completely changed our focus in 2023. You alluded to the fact that we've got other assets, and we do, and pretty exciting ones, but earlier stage, which by definition means that there's more risk attached. So in tough markets, you need to focus your capital, and this is where we've decided to focus it. We're talking a company with a market cap of 3 million quid. That, as I said, is sitting on potentially 300,000 tons of contained copper, certainly potentially 100,000 tons in an open pit scenario, with a 5 to 10 ballpark range. We haven't done any economic studies yet, but $5 to $10 million capex to get that into production. And this is a scenario as well. You might even say, well, what does that mean for dilution? Well, potentially not that much. You've got huge amounts of funding for companies like us to get into production with economic developments. I'll get a call from bloody Trafigura asking me if I've got any concentrate. So, well, no, not yet, but let's chat in a year. And the likelihood is that that they wouldn't even be economically comparable on the terms that they can offer to someone like Glencore or someone like ECR Minerals for that mill feed. So, we'd like to see how that plays out. But this is an asset that today I can tell you I feel we can put into development. The results are shallow. They're looking above 1% copper, enough to say that there's a very reasonable likelihood of an economic open pit ore body here.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. Next question I have here: of the recently finished drilling campaign, how many meters were drilled altogether?
I'm trying to remember the exact number. It was just over 1,500 meters, which was less than what we'd originally expected to do. And the reason that it was less than that is because we were looking at the results and we decided that we could come to a conclusion as to the future of the Vancouver deposit, drilling less meters ultimately.
Okay. So it saves money.
So we exactly right. So we were drilling those meters. We were looking at the core. We said, look, there's probably not the necessity right now to try and convert the entire open pit and underground into a JORC resource to make that comparison. Let's concentrate on the open pit for the time being. We'll save the capital because that's the most likely development option anyway. And so that's where we've made that focus. So we save the money and hopefully that'll be put into drilling and scoping study next year.
Great. Okay, thank you for that. Is the rare earth elements prospect now back on the back burner following this year's exploration results?
Yeah, it is pretty much. Subject to cost of capital at the moment, which let's be fair, is quite high. I mean, I just participated in our recent raising at 1.5p. Put in about sort of 19,000 quid, but I put 45,000 quid in at 5p when we listed 2 years ago. So to me, that's a very expensive cost of capital. I own close to 10% of the company, and it's hard yakka when you do nothing. In my mind, you do nothing but kick goals, creating value, but the share price falls. So the cost of capital is quite high at the moment. So we need to really, really focus where that money gets spent, and there's no doubt that the VMS portfolio is where that money needs to be spent. So for the time being, they'll be for our own capital. That's where the focus will be until that cost of capital gets a bit lower. Okay,
super, thank you. Would you consider taking funding from a royalty company to expedite the path to production?
Yeah, I don't think any particular style of funding is going to expedite that path to production. That's going to happen at the pace that the company should be going, which is as fast as possible. But what you're talking about there is again relating to that cost of capital aspect. So what are you giving up today for what future value? I put royalty in the same basket as doing a prepay, as doing the same basket as any other style of financing. Like a farm in or a joint venture, for instance. And what does that mean for shareholders? We've discussed farm in joint ventures, or almost perpetual discussions for farm in joint ventures on these assets, but inevitably it comes back to, well, the value of your company is X, and my view is that the value of the asset is, I don't know, like multiples 10, 20, 30 times what our current market cap is. And so if you start giving that away because markets are a bit drab, then that's probably not the best long-term value for shareholders. So you could arguably say, well, you could easily say the same thing with the royalty. So it's something that I think in 2024 I'll start to weigh up, very much depending on how our share price goes compared to the value of the asset.
Great. Okay, I can see some more questions are coming in, so this is good. Got plenty of interest in East Star. Would you consider vending a project to another PLC to enable fast tracking, or have you considered a project generation model?
Yes, both. Absolutely, yeah. It's management. It's management time, if I'm honest, more than anything else. I mean, I do pretty crazy hours. Before this, I just flew back from meeting with the Akim of Shemanayaka that runs the Fukuoka project. So I was out there today, discussing our assets and next year, and got in at 9 p.m. So we need to make sure we focus our attention. Yes, definitely is the answer if the right opportunity prevails. And we'll see how that gets taken forward. That was the Vend one. What was the second part of the question, Nick? Just remind me.
The second part was project generation model.
Yeah, exactly. So look, there's a real opportunity for that here. We've got pretty established infrastructure. We've got a cracking team. And you've got majors coming into country. So Rio Tinto's been here for a while, and Fortescue came in at the same time as us in 2019. And now you've got Barrick coming in, you've got First Quantum coming in, and others are sort of rearing their head a little bit. So, there is real potential to start to look at assets which otherwise we might not be funding ourselves. So, for example, copper porphyry exploration. I'd love to find a giant copper porphyry deposit, but it costs quite a lot of money and takes quite a lot of time. And so a junior company with limited capital needs to focus its attention. But nonetheless, we've got a lot of targets that we'd be super interested in taking forward. But I'll only do that if someone else is going to write the check. So those two things need to line up perfectly together, basically. Okay. If we can do that, then absolutely we'll be project generating. But it's important not to distract ourselves too much. I just probably want to focus on this female spot a bit more, because even for Kuba, right, is actually quite small compared to all the other assets on this belt. I mean, any one of these mines like Artemyevsky or that's operating today is $1 billion company, right? And we still think we've had the absolute foremost world's expert in VMS deposits, Bruce Gamel, review our portfolio and write a report. He said, "Yeah, this is completely underexplored, and there's absolutely an opportunity for additional deposits, both on our license and also along other parts of the belt as we vector in our exploration strategy." So for Kuba would be great. Let's get that into production and start generating some good cash flow and return for shareholders. But we think there's a 50 million tonne at 3 to 5% copper equivalent sitting underneath cover on our license. So let's go find that as well. And we're doing the work to vector in on that. We're doing, part of what you don't hear about as much this year is that we've had field teams out sampling all of the deposits along the belt to get their lithogeochemical signature. And, if we can refine that, we can typecast them properly. There's been lots of reports that are written, but, you really need to perfect it and get your own database based on the detailed analysis that we can do today, which you couldn't do 30 or 40 years ago. So the detection limits that you get from ICP-MS and so on can get this fingerprinting for you. And you look at the immobile elements of your rare earth, your tantalum and niobium and so on, and say, right, this horizon that Artemyevsky sits in, we've got that same package that goes through, this part of our license. Right, that's our focus. We flew heli-borne EM survey. We've got an EM signature over here. We've looked at the rocks at surface. We know we've got alteration. So right rock package, alteration, EM signature. Great. Now let's find exactly where we drill that hole. So that's work that we've been undertaking this year, and I call them our medium-term targets. And that's going to continue next year. Right. So with any luck, we'll be progressing a couple of those targets to maybe drill ready by the end of next year. And then we've got some slightly more advanced one in Talovskoy, which I've talked about before, which had incredible surface grades. It's an old sort of mining hill, let's say, with 4 or 5 little adits that they were mining these incredibly high grade pods. So we are refining our exploration strategy for that as well, and that's something I'd like to drill early next year. Okay. So we've got our hands full in for Kuba. It won't stop me from being a project generator, but like I said, someone else has got to pay for it.
Sure. Okay. Well, I think there's maybe one or two other questions left, so I'll just see what comes in here. With respect to a future RC campaign at Vancouver, when do you think this may start?
I would say, well, depending on the winter season, to be honest, almost definitely by May, but hope potentially by April. We've got a bit of a soft winter at the moment. It's quite a late start, so it's looking a bit thin on the ground, but we'll see how that plays out for the rest of the year. And just on the point with RC, I'd expect it to be RC and or diamond. The diamond rig's sitting on the site at the moment, and there's certain structural information that you can get from diamond, and also depths that you can drill that you can't with RC in Kazakhstan. But ideally, it's both. But definitively, we can get diamond started quite quickly, and then we'll see what RC capacity we can get in there. But that would be good because obviously RC is a bit cheaper to drill than diamond.
Yeah. Well, I see one last question, and then we will go to our next guest. So it's about the digitization of historic data. Is this ongoing and throwing out new prospects?
Oh, it's perpetual. It's absolutely perpetual. I mean, we've got, if I could share my QGIS screen with you, we digitized 42,000 meters for the Vancouver deposit. The Vancouver deposit actually continues goes outside of our license to the west, which is an area that's just been carved out under the town of Vancouver, and then into further west, which goes back into our license and goes all the way up to Pokrovskoye, which is an old mine finished in about 1979. It was fairly small. It was 411,000 tons, but it was about 25% copper equivalent, right? Really punchy. We'd love to find another one of those in that region. So that's some additional work that we're doing, which I don't talk about. But that whole area, I mean, that would be about I don't know, maybe 200,000-300,000 meters of drilling. We've put the results in GIS, but we haven't done all of the full digitization because it's not showing up the same prospectivity of a deposit as Vancouver. That's about 5% of our license. So there would be hundreds of thousands of meters of drilling across the license area, historical IP and geochem. So we've digitized most of that. But what happens when you digitize it is you find areas of particular interest. So there's another one which I haven't started talking about publicly yet because we're still refining it. But it's really exciting. It's next to a deposit. So there's a deposit called Rulika that's kind of half on our license and half off. It's 14 million tons at about 1.2% copper, but it's under a town. And but the area that I find exciting is to the northeast of it. And so now we know the drill results for the historical work that was just to the south, but now we go and collect the cross sections. So you go into the old sheds and you find these really, really detailed reports which give you the mineralogy, the lithology and so on in a lot more detail. So that really informs your geological opinion before you start doing your own drilling. You're just saving millions. It's fantastic.
Sure. Okay, very quickly, there's one last question, and I will have to go to our next guest because we are slightly over time. But can a future cash raising include a retail offer?
I don't see why not. I don't. I'm not going to start structuring future capital raisings today. I don't even like talking about future capital raisings. Until such a time as they're sort of required.
Okay.
But if that's something which shareholders desire, I mean, I'm all for looking after existing shareholders. So I want people along for the ride.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alex. Can you stick around for half an hour, or do you need to get off?
Sure, I'm awake now, so I'll sit unless I start to fade. I'll try and hang around.
Great. Okay. Well, if you're still here in half an hour, we'll bring you back for the round table. But thank you very much for your time, Alex Walker, CEO of ECR Minerals. Very good session there. Thanks. You very much. So let me bring in our third and final guest of the evening. That is Oliver Friesen, the CEO of Golden Metals. It's good to see you again, Oliver. Of course, I saw you at the Resourcing Tomorrow event. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Mark. You actually you put me on stage early there during Alice's talk, so I got a bit of a shock there. But
yes, that was an error on my part. Yes, you made a
It's on my face, but anyways, we're all good.
Yes, it's a subliminal Oliver Friesen for half a second. So
exactly.
But you're here now for real. So We're going to talk, of course, about Garfield and, of course, Pilot Mountain. Of course, Golden Metal Resources, an exploration company focused on tungsten, gold, copper, silver, and zinc within Nevada, USA. And you hold 4 mining assets comprising of the 100% owned Pilot Mountain, your flagship project, and, of course, Garfield and Stonewall project, together with an earning option over the Golconda Summit project. So let's start with...
And give me, Mark. It's 5.
Sorry, yeah, that's correct. I can't count. Thank you very much for...
It's all good. It's all good. It's a relatively new one in the portfolio, so I'll let you get away with it.
Okay, thank you, yeah. Well, let's start on Pilot Mountain. What's the current state of play at Pilot Mountain, given the recent moves by the company, particularly when we've talked before about partnering with Oxford Sigma on the tungsten offtake and appointments, of course, of key people to the team to assist with the US government collaborations and possible non-dilutive grants. So what's the state of play over at Pilot Mountain as it stands now?
Yeah, that's a bit of a loaded question. So maybe what we'll do is we'll just take a bit of a step back. And I think, during Alex's talk, I was sort of listening to him talk about the amount of digitization and how much work goes into really understanding the existing data set. So maybe we just step back a bit and we'll talk about kind of where we started, where we're going, and then we're going to go from there and kind of how those play into some of those questions that you asked. So,
sure.
The reality is when you take on an asset that's an advance, and as big as Pilot Mountain, there's a lot of work to be done before you can really get to those next important steps. So obviously, number one step is to do your historic data compilation. Hundreds of drill holes, historic geophysics, geochemistry. The work has been ongoing at Pilot Mountain for probably the last 30, 40 years, on and off. So obviously, there's a lot of historical data that we needed to go through. So obviously, when we first acquired the asset, that was the first thing that we focused on. Reason being, you don't want to go and duplicate work. You want to make sure that you can identify the areas that they looked at historically, and then expand on those. So that was kind of the first step that we took. Got the data into a position that we were really happy with. Following that, looking for holes in the data set or areas that maybe have been underexplored. So that's what we did next. So we followed up early in the life of the company and did IP geophysics on top of the kind of historical work that we did. One of the important things to always do is try to phone previous groups or geologists that have been involved with the project. Obviously, they're intimately, acutely aware of what they did there and kind of what the next steps were in their eyes. So obviously spoke to the previous head geologist who worked on the project back in 2018, kind of gave him the hypothetical scenario, which is if you had more budget, where would you have gone? He definitely wanted to continue working the asset, but the purse strings didn't allow at the time. But what he highlighted and what I also thought from my own analysis was the fact that we needed to do property-wide geophysics. Reason being, they had done a very select IP survey over one part of the property, which identified some really exciting results. And we wanted to expand that across the entire property, looking for new targets. We have 4 satellite tungsten skarn deposits, but the way that these systems typically form as a geologist, they're not kind of these isolated systems. They're all connected at depth. And on top of that, when you're looking for skarns, the one thing you want to look for is a porphyry as well. So spoke to the geologist, decided to do some geophysics. The other great thing about doing geophysics over an existing ore body is the exact same geophysical signatures that line up with your in-ground mineralization you can look for elsewhere on your property. So that's exactly what we did. And to our luck and to our excitement, the IP work identified 5 very high priority targets outboard of the main zones that have been drilled and defined. That includes 3 additional skarn targets and 2 porphyry targets. As I mentioned, that's always, as a geologist, when you're working on a skarn, you're always kind of in the back of your mind looking for a porphyry. So we went and did that geophysics and delivered some really exciting results to the market early after we had bid its aim on, I think it was May 10th of this year. Following that, now that we have all our historical data, we need to model this thing. We hired a former SRK geologist who actually lives in Arizona. So he knows the western part of the US very well. So we modeled all of those drill holes. And what we're ultimately looking to do there is figure out, first of all, where there's holes in the existing deposit, as in we can drill and upgrade those resources. But also on top of that, I think more importantly is looking for extensions of mineralization, either down dip along strike, at Pilot Mountain. It's a fantastic exploration opportunity. The previous company had a arms like geologist come and look at the upside potential, and at the time came up with either 2x or 3x what's currently in the ground as sort of a baseline and optimistic target. That's without the IP geophysics we've done recently. So there's a massive exploration opportunity here at Pilot Mountain. So now that we've modeled everything, we're in a position to start looking at where do we want to drill next. You know, at Golden Metal, we're really of the belief that you need to measure twice and cut once. Drilling is expensive, exploring is expensive. We want to make sure that when we go actually drill, we're drilling in spots that are going to deliver exciting results to our shareholders. So now when we move to the modeling stage, we've identified all of sort of our high priority drill targets as well as targets over the IP anomalies, and now we're in the permitting stage. So I think, you know, if you look back and sort of reflect on the last 6 months and all those different elements that are important building blocks to where we're going, it's very clear how important this work is and how much we push the asset forward. But how does that kind of filter into your question? Well, obviously, we need to make sure that we're pushing this asset forward and getting ourselves in a position of readiness. But as you mentioned, there's a lot of sort of intangible things that we've been doing. The market, I think in some cases, hasn't really understood the logic behind some of these decisions. But ultimately, they factor into the ongoing discussions with the U.S. government. There's sort of a checklist that a lot of these different agencies and groups in the U.S. look for when looking to deploy these grants effectively. So, for instance, the OTC listing, that's a really important one, right? They want to know that U.S. investors can get access to what you're doing. So that was a really important building block towards that grant process. On top of that, as you mentioned, we brought in some really good people to consult us. I'm a Canadian myself. I live in the UK. The American government can be a bit of a black box at times. So we brought in Cheng Turkmani, who's an absolute expert in the space. She lives in Washington, D.C. She lives and breathes grants. So she's been in the background helping me understand, okay, what boxes do we need to check? Who do we talk to? So she's been really important for us. And as you mentioned, the LOI offtake, that was a really, really important step and one that we were advised by our people to say, you need to get some sort of LOI offtake signed because that's something that the government looks at very closely, and in particular, looking for agreements with US-based processing companies. We got the best one of the bunch. Global Tungsten and Powders is the largest tungsten processing company and offtake partner in the entire US. We have a very good relationship with them. And then on top of that, the MOU. That's another one that I think people saw and were maybe a bit confused by or didn't quite understand what we were doing there. But the reality is, because there's so much funding available through the Department of Defense, Department of Commerce, Department of Energy, we're looking to put our best foot forward towards each of those departments because they all have their pools of capital. So for instance, the MOU that we signed with Oxford Sigma, that's looking at a Western world supply chain for nuclear fusion. Reason being, the main input metal into nuclear fusion is tungsten. And it's some crazy, just mind-blowing numbers have come out of those conversations about how much tungsten is going to be needed to fuel these reactors. I mean, we're probably 10 years away, but even the R&D facilities are being built now in France, in the US, and they're putting in massive orders for tungsten. So to sign that MOU is really important because it allows us to open up and have conversations with the Department of Energy, who are obviously concerned about nuclear fusion in the US. So a lot of sort of intangible things that all kind of filter and play into the importance of these grants and the position that we find ourselves in with this asset.
Indeed. Well, it's interesting you say that these intangible things, they're all very important though, you know, and it shows that you're really taking it seriously. There's lots of interest in this project, but yes, they are kind of intangible, really nice things to have going on with regard to the project. But you talk there about you sort of getting everything modeled. Are you in the process now of actually planning something tangible, like a drill program?
You continue to ask me that, Mark. Yes, that's what we're working on now, and that's exactly why we're permitting. Like I said, we measured twice and cut once. I've been involved with 50 to 70 drill programs that I've managed and explored myself. It's expensive, and in every experience, if you spend an extra month or 2 months, whatever it takes to make sure your ducks are in a row, that's going to ultimately lead to better shareholder returns. So that's what we're doing. We're getting our ducks in a row. We're permitting now. And that's obviously, we're going to permit in advance of drilling.
Okay. And do you feel that this asset is going to be like very strategically important for the United States, given the current geopolitical climate we find ourselves in.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it sounds a little cliched, and I kind of hate myself for saying it, but timing is really everything. And especially in this space, that's so true. I mean, in 2018, the previous company who owned this was looking to push this forward into development, but ultimately the markets just didn't allow them to do that at that time. But fast forward 5 years, and I think, even within the last 2 years, with geopolitical tensions arising, I mean, it's horrible to see what's going on in the world, but it's just a reality of the situation. That puts us in a position with the largest undeveloped tungsten asset on U.S. soil, when governments are now realizing how important it is to have domestic sources of these really important input metals. And in particular, tungsten has very significant military applications. One thing I haven't really spoken about too much publicly, but one thing that maybe listeners have come across or have seen, and I personally have seen this on my Twitter feed and various news articles, is the fact that the U.S. is supplying high-speed armor-piercing ammunitions to Ukraine and other countries in the world. And one of the major input metals for that technology and that military device is tungsten. And the U.S. cannot supply and produce enough of these right now. There's a huge shortage of those. And obviously, on top of that, when you look at their supply chains, well, they're getting most of their tungsten from China. So it's this really kind of poor system right now, and obviously that needs to change. And just on top of that, another kind of data point for listeners is the DLA, which is the Defense Logistics Agency. They're a group in the U.S. that actually maintains large stockpiles of strategic, critical, and specifically defense metals. And they had at one point very large tungsten stockpiles that they could then deploy during periods of, hey, we need more tungsten kind of right now, which have happened obviously many times in the past. But those stockpiles have been depleted to very critically low levels. So you look at all these kind of data points together, the U.S. reliant on China right now, the U.S. is looking to supply and be a military leader, giving ammunitions and other military devices to various countries in the world. But they rely on China, they don't have a domestic source, and DLA stockpiles are critically low. So, I mean, you add all those data points together, and it just really highlights how important this asset is. It's the largest undeveloped tungsten asset on U.S. soil. And there's just, every day almost, I look at my Twitter feed and I look at the news, and this asset, in my opinion, becomes more and more critical and more important, especially as China looks to kind of start to hone in and look to almost hoard a bit some of their really important critical battery and defense metals. And tungsten is one that potentially could be targeted here soon with all those defense applications that we discussed.
Great. Okay, thank you. Oliver, before we go to the open Q&A, I want to just bring up some recent news. Only a few days ago, I think, with regards Garfield, and the headline was something along the lines of Garfield potential for material copper deposit. Now, I'm sure you wrote that RNS. You certainly wouldn't have signed off on that kind of an RNS. You're not the sort of person to do that without conviction. It's a very kind of strong headline. So what's giving you this confidence, and how do you indeed realize that potential at Garfield?
Yeah, no, you're right, Mark. I'm for those who know me and have followed me, I'm a pretty conservative guy. As a geologist myself and someone who dealt with Canadian regulators who are very technical and very stringent, I choose my words wisely. So, when I say something like that, I can stand behind it, and I can actually walk people through why I think that's the case. The reality is we put out a sort of a teaser, I guess you could say. It's the preliminary results. Obviously, a bunch of over-limit results were hit there, including about 6 or 7 copper results and a handful of gold. And so what that is telling me right now, and with the data I've plotted up, is we've now identified high-grade copper, and it's over 1% because we need to get the over-limits back. But that footprint extends for over about 1.5 kilometers now, and almost consistently, if you go, every 200 meters or whatever it is, you find another, say, over 1% right now. We'll see what those final results look like. But as someone who's spent a lot of time on porphyry deposits, I mean, I grew up in British Columbia. I worked up and down the coast of BC in a very prolific copper gold porphyry belt, and down into the US and Arizona and in Nevada. So I know these deposits quite well. I know how important they are as sources of copper, silver, and gold in the world. And so when I saw the grades that I saw, I mean, copper is obviously the main thing we're looking at. But even the kickers, I mean, typically in these porphyry systems, especially these alkalic porphyries is what they're called, a 0.2, a 0.3 gram per ton gold and maybe 2-3 gram per ton silver is a really, really exciting kicker, because obviously when you're mining these things, Copper is kind of the main one that people are focused on, but the gold and silver can be really, really influential in economics. So what I'm seeing, I wrote down some numbers here, but up to 37 grams per ton silver in some of these porphyry samples. And I looked at the actual logs. I mean, they're all kind of fine grained intrusive rocks. That's exactly what you want to see. And then gold over limit. I mean, just to get over 1 gram per ton to go along with, multi-% copper. I mean, as someone who understands porphyries, I was very excited, which is why I try to portray that in the RNS. And obviously the over limits, we'll get that out shortly here. And I think that will tell the full picture, or start to tell the full picture as to what these grades are looking like. And I think the thing that really stood out to me was the magnitude and the consistency of these high grade samples over a considerable distance within a well-known porphyry belt. We have over 1% over, I think it's about 1,500 meters, and that's about zones, I think about 750 meters wide. On a broader scale, you go across the whole property, I think it's about 3 kilometers by 1.5. So I think Garfield, it should highlight to listeners and our investors the quality of the portfolio we built. I mean, Pilot Mountain, I could talk about it for hours and hours and hours, and I think it's so clear why it's our flagship asset. But for us to take Garfield and pay very little for it 2 years ago, and now have it be a bona fide copper discovery, and one that could potentially be a standalone asset in a company, and one that we're pushing forward very quickly, is super exciting. And I think more importantly, as a geologist and someone who's pushing forward lots of assets in the portfolio, to see this one shoot up that value curve with the money we've deployed so far is really exciting. So we're looking forward to getting the over limits out. I encourage everyone to keep an eye open for those, and then we'll certainly talk about next steps and how we can continue to unlock value for our shareholders here.
Great. Well, as I say, I'm going to ask you another question, but I would encourage anyone who has other questions just to put them in now, and we'll bring them up in a few moments. But I do just want to, I know, don't get upset with me for asking you about drilling again, but I mean, given the potential there at Garfield, do you have to make a call? You said that obviously drilling is not cheap. Do you have to make a call which one to focus your money on?
For sure. I think one of the things just to note, especially on Golconda and Garfield, is because they're a bit earlier stage than Pilot Mountain. As in Pilot Mountain, we have a plethora of drill holes to go off. We can do RC drilling, and RC drilling in Nevada is probably about a third of the cost of diamond drilling. So diamond drilling we'll need to do at Pilot Mountain because we need that extra detail, the structural detail, the geotechnical detail. Whereas Garfield and Golconda, we're looking to make drilling discoveries, and you can do RC drilling and get similar results. So RC is certainly an option. It's we're 2 miles off the road, is a mining town about 10 minutes down the road. So I mean, it's expensive, but there's ways to do it cost effectively, which is how we do everything at Golden Metal. We look to make sure that our money goes as far as possible. And so RC drilling is certainly one of those things that we can do and deploy to make sure that we can look to make discoveries for our shareholders, but without spending, the huge amounts that are required for diamond.
Okay, great. Thank you, Oliver. So let's find out what questions people have. So here we go. Would you consider expanding the footprint at Garfield, or are there complementary projects that you could look to bring in alongside?
Well, at Garfield, we've expanded 3 or 4 times now. So we're always looking to acquire new ground. We took on a very small footprint, and as we've continued to work, we've found the footprint just grows and grows and grows. So we've already expanded, I think, 3 or 4 times now. So we're always looking for new opportunities. In terms of acquiring new assets, there is a well kind of trodden, a north-south trending copper porphyry belt. But I think, actually, I know we're really happy with what we have within our actual tenements right now. Like I said, we'll certainly keep our eye open for areas adjacent, but I wouldn't look at bringing in new assets particularly, but we're always looking to find areas to expand it, and which is why we've gone from, I think it was 3 or 4 claims to start with, and now we have, I think, 50 now, or north of 50. So we're always looking to expand, and that's something that I would prefer to do, because if we expand, we pay the staking cost versus acquiring, you pay whatever the vendor or person wants. So it's a much more cost-effective way to grow these assets and add value.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Oliver, when would you expect the US government investment into metals in order to secure any product for home use?
For home use, I think I understand the question. I mean, the US investment is happening now. If that's the question, the DPA Title III, which is one of the main funding bodies that that we're focused on because of our military applications, has deployed, I think, $600 million just this year alone. They got approved for, I think, $1 billion. And as far as I know, they're going to get more in the budget for next year. I mean, the Biden administration is only upping the ante and giving these groups more and more money because the importance of the Western world supply chain just increases daily. So, I mean, I see companies getting these funds from the DOE, the DOC, the DOM, almost weekly now. So the money's happening now. I mean, it's like I said, in the last 2 years alone, and probably in the last year, I mean, it's crazy what's happened because before the government, hey, maybe we'll help you out, but now it's like, take the money. We need these products and these metals from that you have in the ground to enter the U.S. supply chain. So the money's happening now, and it's happening across many U.S. agencies, which is why it's such an important part of our strategy to look to ways to tap into that, lessening the burden on shareholders to fund exploration and development.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. Your recent RNS talks of the porphyry system at Garfield, I know you've mentioned that earlier. What work have you done that gives you confidence that Garfield hosts a large copper deposit?
Yeah, so we sort of touched on that in the last question, but just to reiterate, we're doing methodical stepwise exploration at Garfield. So we acquired a very small asset 3 or 2 years ago. And as exploration geologists, we look at this and we say, okay, what are the next steps? What are the next steps? So we did a property-wide high-resolution geochemical survey. That kind of gives you the heart of the main anomalies. We had a very specialized geochemist, former chief geochemist at Barrick, look at those results. He's the one that conclusively highlighted both porphyry and skarn signatures. So because of that exciting result, we immediately got in there with the rock sampling and mapping. Those results, the preliminary results, are now out with the over limits to come here shortly. And then after that, we're going to launch. We'll talk about what the next steps are going to be. And ultimately, the goal is to get this thing drill ready, which is trending very quickly in that direction. So the work we've done so far, it continues to get better and better, which is why we're so optimistic. And it's why we're going to continue to push this one forward in tandem with the other assets in the portfolio.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yes. How big is Pilot Mountain in terms of tungsten? As it looks from the work you've done, that the footprint of the deposit is much bigger than originally thought. Yeah,
no, exactly. So in terms of tungsten, it's the largest undeveloped tungsten resource on U.S. soil. So we have 12.53 million tons at 0.27% tungsten trioxide. That has significant copper, silver, and zinc credits. From the tungsten equivalent, it's almost about 0.5% tungsten equivalent. But as the question alludes to, there's much more there. And I mentioned in the earlier question, the previous company had an arm's length geologist look at the exploration upside and came up with either a 2x or 3x target. The 2x was baseline, 3x was the optimistic target. That's without the work that we've done there now. And I just encourage all listeners to go to our website, look at the maps we put out. And what we've done there is there's 4 red polygons which outline the current trace of the existing known in-ground resources. And then the red areas are the exploration targets, which are the skarn and porphyries that we've identified from the geophysics. And you'll see how significant those footprints are compared to what we have right now. So when I first looked at this asset 3 years ago before we acquired it, I'm like, I'm an exploration geologist by trade. So when I saw it, I love to make discoveries and drill and find new resources. So that's kind of how the lens that I looked at this project by. And sure enough, that's what really drew me in was the copper potential, the tungsten potential across the property. So yeah, the question, the person who asked the question is exactly right. Right now, it's the largest undeveloped tungsten in the U.S., which obviously puts us in a really fortuitous and enviable position in the U.S. But we think we can get this way bigger. And the work that we've done so far and the work done previously certainly highlights that this is just the tip of the iceberg, so to say.
Okay, good, excellent. I think there's a couple more questions that we can bring up here. So, does size matter in terms of project development and the securing of US grants for development?
Yeah, absolutely. When you're having these conversations, and really the main questions that they're asking are, number one, how much metal can you supply? Is it actually going to make a material dent in our current problems and our current imports that come from unfriendly countries? And the other thing that they're really interested in is timelines. They want to know, hey, if we give you X amount of money, how much can you shorten the timeline from where you are now to actual metal out of the ground? So size is really important. Largest undeveloped tungsten deposit on U.S. soil. We think there's a scope to increase that materially. But on top of that, we actually ran some numbers, some of the guys at the GMET team, looking at what the current import picture is for U.S. tungsten imports, and China obviously being their biggest import partner. And Pilot Mountain alone, if we went into production today with the work that was done in 2018 without any resource expansion, we could reduce or replace 40% of Chinese tungsten imports into the U.S. today. If we went in today, I mean, that just shows you how material the tungsten from this asset could be, and that's without any expansion. So the reality is, if we are successful in expanding this, and ultimately if a bigger production scenario presents itself, I mean, you could see a way that this asset alone could replace China. Obviously, a lot of work to do to get to that point. But just to give you some data points right now, based on the 2023 numbers, that's what Pilot Mountain would do. And then in terms of timelines, the work that was done in 2018 has got us to a position. A lot of that kind of, that unsexy development work, the permitting, some of the based on environmental discussions with the Nevada Power, those type of things have all been dealt with. A lot of the advanced metallurgical work. So a lot of those boxes have been checked, which allows us to take the money if we're successful and immediately deploy it towards those next steps, which is to get this thing into production.
Okay, well, that's significant. I didn't know that. So Pilot Mountain could potentially replace 40% of what China produces for the US intake, is that?
Currently imports into the US, yeah, right. And China is their biggest import partner, so it's a material amount.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think we have one more question, then we will go to our round table. So how highly would you rate Pilot Mountain against all the other projects you have reviewed as a geo during your career?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think my enthusiasm probably answers that question. It was when we really sat down to put this portfolio together, we had a lot of options. And this is one very quickly, I remember seeing it and going, yes, this is the one. And this is before tungsten became so important and all these kind of various geopolitical tensions kind of ratcheted up. And now what really, the exploration is what kind of got me really excited in the first place. But now what really has me excited and kind of, really enthusiastic is the tungsten. And now that I've kind of gotten under the hood and been to the conferences and spoken to the off-takers and talked to Oxford Sigma about nuclear fusion and spoken to the US government and the different departments, that's what's really got me kind of from here to here. Or sorry, I should say from here to here. The exploration kind of drew me in, and now it's understanding tungsten, how important this metal is, and in particular in the US and the Western world, which has got me really excited. So hopefully that answers the question. It's a great asset. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yes, well, your enthusiasm does speak volumes. It's always great to see a CEO or a geo/CEO get excited. It's always gives lots of encouragement to me when I see that. So thank you very much, Oliver. Hopefully next year, 2024, will be good for GMET and get some drills turning. I won't mention the drills again the rest of the evening. But what I'd like to do is bring all our guests back now. So we've got Nick Tulloch, we've got Mike Whitlow and Alex Walker. Everyone is back. Thank you all for sticking around, particularly Alex. I know it's very late for you over there. But what we'd like to do now is in this question time style, I suppose, the roundtable discussion. I'll pose a point, and I'm just keen to hear everyone's thoughts, and hopefully we can have some dialogue. And the first point I want to bring up, it's deliberately written for the guests this evening, because I do feel this is one of the better panels of guests we've had in terms of what I'd like to discuss here, which is everyone here, all the directors here, I think consider the alignment and building value for shareholders very high on their agendas. Given some of the history, Mike, of course, with your Doc Holliday persona over on Twitter, there being in the space for a long time. Alex, I know we've spoken about you feeling that a lot of CEOs are pulling the wool over your eyes in times gone by. You made a lot of money, then you lost it all, and you sort of educated yourself to not be fooled by some of the stories. So I just would like to get some thoughts, really, is why you feel this is so important, and what actions are you specifically bringing to sort of demonstrate that you're doing this, that you are aligned with shareholders. Alex, let me ask you first, what is it that you can do with the company to demonstrate that you really are aligned with shareholders, and you're going to do what you say you're going to do? You're an honest chap.
It's a funny old thing, isn't it? Because there's always a perpetual demand from people, from shareholders, to do a bit of everything. I mean, I've moved my family to Kazakhstan. We've lived here for 2 years now to bring these projects forward, and I've written checks for every single round of funding that that our company's done. So it's real money out. And I was listening to the guys at the start as well, taking pay cuts and taking payment in kind and shares is massive. And when markets are tough, you're expected to take pay cuts, you're expected to invest in the company, you're expected to do all these sorts of things. So what you're actually doing is, you've got a riskier situation for yourself in terms of your job. Plus you're putting your savings, which you'd be, you're using for the just in case scenario, into the company that you're working for to help prolong it and push it forward. So, I mean, we're doing all of these sorts of things, right? It's we're obviously here for a big payoff, because that's why we're in junior exploration. It's a higher risk investment thesis, but the payoff is so big. That's why people are in on it. You just have a look at, I like to model the way that we go about things on companies that I've studied in the past, like Independence Group and so on, this sort of diversified portfolio approach and farm outs and the like. I mean, outside of moving my family, across the world, continually writing checks, taking payments in kind, I'm not sure what else I could be doing. When we vended the asset, we vended for what we thought at the time was a really cheap vend at 5p, and so we took a lot of what we expected to receive as performance shares. So the performance hurdle for the vendors, of which I'm 50%. Is based on 1 million ounces at 2 grams gold. So we even set that threshold, pretty high. You've got, at the time, I think that was about, at 5p, that was about $4.70 an ounce. The value of that at 1.5p, it's about, $1.70 an ounce. So, so I guess that's my answer. But, I wouldn't expect everyone to have the same answer. I mean, can't always perpetually write checks. I mean, even in the last round of financing, I diluted from nearly, I think it was 11.7% to about 9.7%, because I put in 19,000 quid, but I'd opted to scale back. I mean, I'd put my hand up for 40, 50,000 quid, but that would have been a serious depletion of my my personal finances had I got the full amount. But I did say I would scale back to allow new investors to come in. But that's the concern. You can't write checks forever for these things. So you've got to build that value fast.
And when it comes to sort of, I don't know, maybe transparency, for example, because I remember the story you told me where I can't remember, you made a fair bit of money. I can't remember the figures, but then you kind of lost it all and you bought into some of the nonsense and you educated yourself. I mean, is there any way you can perhaps bring some of that experience to shareholders to kind of show your credibility in the space, really, that you are doing you're on their side?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to do outside of the stuff that everyone on this panel seems to be doing. Is the only way you can really truly demonstrate it is showing that you're aligned, because you're not taking a big salary, for instance, or you're taking it in shares, or whatever the case may be. And like I said, not everyone can do that. I can't cut myself back to zero because I've got living costs in Kazakhstan. My wife's had to stop working for us to move here. So, there's only so far you can go. Like, you've got to educate yourself at the end of the day, and you can't go out and get a degree in geology and mining engineering and metallurgy and corporate finance, and be this guru. I mean, everyone on this panel's trying to be as intelligent as they can about their approach, but even the geologists won't be the only. Oliver will still consult with other geologists. At the end of the day, it's not going to be 100% all in. So I'd encourage investors to do that. Have a conversation, see if you can grow your network and query things. My knowledge base grows every single day, absolutely every single day. New targeting, and you're bringing in new people, and getting new opinions, and it's phenomenal. So just do that as much as you can, and hope that you can refine the losses and the wins.
Indeed. Well, Mike, let me get your thoughts on this. Of course, you've been around the space a long time. You've seen your good fair share of good companies and perhaps not so good companies.
Yeah, they're like tattoos, aren't they? So they look cool when you get them, and then you start regretting them pretty quickly, and it can be really ugly trying to get rid of them as well. So, I mean, yeah, I'm not as smart as Oliver, as young, handsome, or as presentable either. But I can tell you now that this market is as Alex rightly says, it's full of people who are out there, taking the easy wins, and often they're not putting the hard yards in. And Nick and I are in quite a fortunate position where we can come into this company at this point in its life cycle and accept to take shares as payment and set ourselves a performance-based target to achieve. And I don't expect everybody to be able to do that. But if you are able to do it and you choose not to, then that's a very telling story. And I've been fortunate over the last 15, 20 years to have had some success on a couple of occasions, and therefore we can do this. And it's about trying to build a strong team, and if that team support the example that you set in, then you get more out of them, and that's where productivity comes from.
Excellent. Nick, let me bring you in on the ECR side. Your thoughts on that?
Well, similar to Mike, really. I mean, the structure that we've proposed for the two of us, and it was our proposal, it is very blunt. We get substantial remuneration in shares, so we're very much aligned and very obviously very transparently aligned with our shareholders. We succeed, we do well. But more importantly, we succeed, the shareholders do well. And as Mike says, we're fortunate that we're able to put forward that proposal. Even more fortunate than other members of the board have put forward that proposal for their own arrangements. And we stand by that. I think we've said consistently that ECR has got a lot of upside. We've said consistently it's lost its way a little bit with investors, and there's a sort of reconnection to be done. I think it would have been wrong for the two of us to come in and say, look, there's a lot of upside and it's lost its way, but by the way, here's our bill for an enormous salary. It was the right and proper thing for us to say that we will fully align ourselves with shareholders.
Excellent. Well, Oliver, you got some very nice comments there from Mike. You do, you're a very smart man.
I'm just flirting, mate. I'm just flirting. He knows that too.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Making me blush, Mike.
Well, what are your thoughts, Oliver? What have you learned? I know you've got the sort of the more, I don't know, I want to say more credibility, but you've got that experience as a geologist, so you can talk with a bit more credibility on the on the actual asset, perhaps, maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean, just back to the alignment. I mean, Mike and the guys aligned it perfectly. If you're investing in these companies, you want the management to be aligned with you, and ultimately they do that by owning shares of the company and not taking egregious salaries. I mean, when I moved from Canada 3 years ago, someone told me what a non-exec director makes on a company that wasn't really doing anything. I was blown away. I said, they make that much? Because in Canada, if you're a director, you buy shares and you get options, and if it does well, you make money. That's how I was raised. That's how I came up in this space. So that's the model that we've employed. It's kind of the Canadian model, and all the guys here have done the same. That's what we've employed at Golden Metal Resources. If you're investing in a company and the CEO is getting rich because of his salary, well, he's not aligned with the shareholders or the people putting money into this company. So I think a very, very modest salary, it's kind of enough to put food on the table. My fiance doesn't love it, I'll tell you that much. But the reality is, I've invested at the pre-IPO, I've invested at the IPO. I have options. If I want to get rich, and if I get rich, my shareholders get rich. Simple as that. And all these guys are the same way here.
Great, nice feedback. I didn't know you were engaged, so congratulations on that,
Oliver.
Sorry, Mike. Oliver is otherwise engaged. But let's move on to the second point I want to discuss, and it's off the back of the Resourcing Tomorrow conference. I know that I think everyone, Alex, obviously you weren't there, but the rest of us were there, and I just want to sort of get some thoughts from you guys on where perhaps you feel the appetite is at the moment for mining, and what perhaps the hot commodities are, what people were talking about, and what they could be going forward. So, Nick, what did you pick up from that conference, and how do you feel the sector is at the moment?
Well, we touched on this earlier on this evening, and the conference for us was good. We were consistently busy. We'd set up a handful of meetings before the conference, but yeah, I think the highlight for me was there was just a constant flow of people stopping at the booth, wanting to talk to us. Midway through, I think the second afternoon, I made a short speech. I was, half of me thought I'd be sort of speaking to an empty room or an empty set of chairs. Actually, it was pretty full, and a number of people came to talk to us afterwards. So I think what we took from it is that there's genuine interest. We were not there last year. Obviously, Mike and I are new to ECR, but from what I'm hearing, it was busier than last year, better footfall, better quality conversations. The London small cap markets had a tough time, and the whole world's had a pretty sort of tough time across the sort of stock markets over the last 12 months. But there's beginning to be, I think, signs of energy. Interest rates look like they're peaked. Inflation seems to be on the way down. People are looking for opportunities, and you can sort of see that in the secondary issues and the primary issues in London, and that's been reflected across our sector. In terms of commodities, I'm obviously going to say gold. It's what we're interested in, and gold is sort of a perennial favourite. But the other two that really stood out, or one that really stood out, was lithium, and perhaps uranium as well as a sort of second option.
Okay, yeah. Lithium, yes, as well. That was definitely a theme there. But I do tend to agree. I was there in the previous year, and it was definitely better than the previous year. I still don't think we're quite there yet, but it was definitely better. So perhaps there was a bit more money looking to get involved in the space there. And lithium perhaps ties into the battery metals theme. Of course, copper is going to play a significant role in the energy shift. So, Alex, if I was to come to you, what are you getting any feelings? Hopefully you're not feeling too isolated all over there in Kazakhstan, but you're obviously surrounded by lots of other operators. So, do you get a sense of where the sector is and where it might be going?
Yeah, and I keep a pretty close handle on things as well. I've been doing this for nearly 20 years, and I've got my my WhatsApp groups with all my mates in all over the world, and obviously follow it online quite in quite a detailed way. I think there's a couple of points to make. We talk about level of investor interest. Well, it also depends on the level. We're all at the small end, and so we're sort of the last money that trickles down. The big end's gone berserk. These big miners know exactly what's happening in terms of future metal demand. And you see BHP taking over Oz Minerals and deals with Glencore, what's going on with Teck, what's going on the M&A is happening in the big space because these guys are securing their long-term, principally copper, but long-term supply. And copper's an interesting one. We've just had First Quantum issues in Panama with Cobre, and that's 1.5% of global supply. So that might bring this deficit that we're all expecting in 2026, 2027 to next year, or 2025. So there's a real crunch coming, and it was demand driven, but now it's also supply driven, and that's the medium to long term shortfall as well. That's definitively going to come into this space. Look, you've got all these investors on this call, so they're obviously interested in mining, which is great. If you don't have, copper, if you don't have, potentially gold in its perpetual, as was pointed out, its perpetual status in the market. But if you don't have these in your portfolio, you'll underperform over the next 5 to 10 years. It's just unequivocal. Lithium's a fantastic place to be, but when lithium kicked off, there's 600 years of supply sitting in South America, and it's really about production and cost of capital. And it could be the next iron ore, which is produced at, for 20, 30 years at 6, 7, 8 times its marginal cost of production. Lithium could comfortably do that, but there's a lot of it out there. There's no copper, right? You can't just find another Escondida, and we need dozens of them. And so that's a major one for me. There's no doubt that that'll trickle down into the small cap space. But another point is, when we talk about timing the market rather than time in the market, it's always tough for investors, for managers, which are managing cash flow. But good projects will always get funded. If you've got a project that you can definitively demonstrate is going to make money, you'll attract capital, full stop. no matter how rubbish the markets are. So that's that's something which investors need to be reminded of, and that often I think as management we need to remind ourselves of as well.
Yeah, indeed, and that's a very good point. Actually, good projects will always attract the
Hey, we've seen a fair few good projects, never get finished, because the guys that fund them iron them out at the last minute, and then suddenly the asset falls away and gets taken out by the big guy that offered them some funding right at the finishing line, and suddenly your equity holders get. It's not quite as easy as that. I mean, I appreciate what Alex is saying, but let's never forget that those big guys that operate at that end of the market, they don't do it for charity and for the good of the little guy that's punting as well. So it can go wrong at any point at any given time. So these projects do always get developed. They just don't always get developed for the benefit of the little guy and those shareholders. And it's why it's incredibly important that you don't get overly carried away with any of your investments, and you take a sensible approach, manage your own expectations, don't be too overexposed. Just the usual caveats. And we're in the small cap game. I just felt it's pertinent to make that point too.
No, yeah, a very good point. We've seen it before. Good projects do get taken out by the boys, and they want a good they got a good deal.
And not to the benefit of the little fella as well. And that's the point. I mean, it's always nice when a takeover happens and you've been in the shares for a couple of years. You were one of the very few, the small handful that spotted it early. But often, those deals can be taken out on horrendous eye-watering terms for equity holders, and of course, that's something to be mindful of when investing. But I think we're on the cusp of a brighter market. We're seeing that the wind of change slowly blowing this way. Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. I completely agree with that, and I'm pleased to hear Alex talking about the big boys sort of doing well and doing an M&A going on in the space. But I did just want to mention: would it be the responsibility, Mike, do you think, of management then to ensure that the projects don't get taken out on the cheap and the shareholders don't get shafted? Think of it.
No, it's the responsibility of the person. You get in the boxing ring and you start throwing punches and then you get knocked out. I mean, whose responsibility is it? Is it know the moves when you get in there? Because if you don't, you get a bloody nose. And Alex has talked about his experiences, and I've had similar ones myself over the years, and I think there has to be some accountability. So it is the responsibility of shareholders to understand some basic principles, and you try and hone those skills and master them as time goes on. And but it's also worth being quite mindful of the nature of the business we're in. Any one of these companies today could go and do 5, 10, 20 times the money, and they don't necessarily have to have a big discovery in order to do that. Sentiment changes, all of that cash starts rolling downhill. The market gets behind you. Suddenly investors think of as the best thing since sliced bread, and then suddenly his shares are going up 5, 6, 7, 800%. We saw it a couple of weeks ago with Empire Metals. We've seen it, with a couple of other companies. So that's the reason investors are probably tuning in today. They're looking for that next 10, 20x company. And Nick and I can only speak for myself and Nick, we've taken that view. We understand why people want to roll the dice. They're not going to get double sixes every time, but there's a good chance that we can move the needle on a company that's particularly small. The shares are traded at massive multiples of where it is today, historically, based on the assets that they've got today. And the temperature in Victoria is only warming up. But whichever company it is, I think it's important that we understand why people are investing in these companies, and that is because they're looking for those sorts of returns. But when you're making those sorts of returns, make sure you keep a little bit under your pillow so you can look after the family, because that's one of the major problems that people get. Greed is a natural byproduct of being involved in this market. But look, I'm going to be quiet now because I think there's a couple of other guys that probably have got a bit more common sense to apply over my ramblings.
No, but it's good to hear your advice, Doc. Well, advice or thoughts, because you have been around for a long time, and it is that you are right. People need to be responsible for their own investing decisions, and indeed look after that profit when it's there. Oliver, it's you. If you've not had a word on this, have you yet, about this sector? Let me get some thoughts from you.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of metals, I'm excited about it. It may be a poor answer, but honestly, all of them. You look across the board. There's not many, bear cases for many metals right now. I think the reality is, especially in the Western world, we've shot ourselves in the foot for the last multiple decades. We haven't properly funded companies like ours who have great assets. We've made it so difficult in the capital markets to advance things and develop them. And it leads us into a position now where Russia and China and North Korea, mostly China, controls and dominates the supply chain of so many of these really important metals. So the reality is, here we are, end of 2023, geopolitical tensions couldn't be higher. And we're now realizing in Australia and UK and all the Western worlds that kind of come together, we're underweight almost every metal. We've made a huge mistake by making it so difficult for great companies with good management to do it here on home soil. So, it's maybe a poor answer, but honestly, all the metals the guys named, there's a list of probably 20, 30 more that have really, really strong bull cases. And it's one of the reasons why gold and metal, we have tungsten as our focus, but also we have exposure to lithium, copper, silver, and gold, which I think, copper obviously covered as well as gold. We're very bullish on those too. So I think across the board, we're setting up here for what should be one of the best and the most exciting times in the space that we might ever see in our lifetimes.
Excellent. Well, that's good to hear. You're the second person that sort of said that sort of thing. I think another quote I got was, it would be one of the greatest moments to be alive. So the more we hear these things, I mean, it really does fill me with excitement for the sector. Now, I do have one last point, and I know we're a bit short on time, so I might have to go a bit David Dimbleby and give you all just maybe a minute on this. But just one thing I picked up again from the Resourcing Tomorrow conference was the significant government presence that was there, and their interest in securing their supply chain. So there were people there from the US, from the European Union, from the United Kingdom, and sort of smaller countries around the world. There was quite a heavy government presence there. I know, Oliver, at GMET, you're taking that very seriously, but I want to try and get a few words from all of you. Given what is clear, the message from the governments around the world, they want to secure their supply chains. They want to have homegrown security of these commodities. What is it that companies such as yourselves can do to, one, attract attention, wave the flag, but second, take advantage of the interest and potential grants that might be available? Oliver, let me just go to you first, because I know you're very, you've got this pretty much tied up.
Yeah, I mean, you could just replay my previous tape, and Nick's going to answer the question as to what we're doing. Being in the U.S. being the country that's deploying the most capital right now to this cause is obviously great for us. But it's happening across the world now. I mean, most countries in the Western world are now putting funds together to support this cause. And obviously, us being in the U.S., it's a huge part of our strategy. We find ourselves in a very unique position with Pilot Mountain. So yeah, we've put a lot of great people in place. We're having some great conversations, and things are looking very encouraging, and we're going to continue to do that. And obviously, as I mentioned, if we can get the government to pay for exploration and development, that's a great outcome, and that's what I'm pushing for. So it's a great time to be exploring. It's a great time to be exploring it in a lot of these Western countries as well, which are deploying capital to companies like us to make it easier, because obviously the capital markets are challenging. So really exciting times, and a big part of our strategy at Gold Medal.
Yeah, good to hear, Oliver. So, Alex, let me ask you on this with regards to Kazakhstan. What is the Kazakhstan government? How are they sort of making noises in this space? Anything you can do to attract attention? Is it possible in that jurisdiction?
Yeah, absolutely it is. In fact, all three of us are in a really important thing to notice. We're all in mine-building jurisdictions, right? Part of the reason I'm in Kazakhstan is because I was in Sweden before that. These aren't mining-friendly places. So you're on point. I mean, the EU and the UK both signed MOUs with Kazakhstan for critical mineral supply, and they did it because somewhere like Kazakhstan, as in Australia, it's got the resources, but probably the most important thing, it's got the political will to develop those resources, and that's just the critical differential here. It might take. When I was in Sweden, it took 3 years to get approval to drill a hole. We'd already moved on by the time, from our primary asset. By the time we'd sort of gotten those approvals. Whereas in Kazakhstan, in the last 2 years, we've done 4 drilling campaigns in 4 different jurisdictions: heliborne EM surveys, IP surveys, ground mag, drone mag, multiple field traverses. I mean, you couldn't ask for more activity from a company of our size, because you can get it done. And so that's really important. That's why they're signing MOUs for this critical mineral supply. What does that mean in terms of funding? Well, they're still trying to figure it out. I mean, Kazakhstan's doing a great job. It's refined its mineral law in 2018, which is why we're here. They're strongly promoting support from federal and local governments for fast tracking development. There's tweaks in the mineral law that are helping push this forward. And so they're looking at partnerships for things like critical mineral processing and so on with various UK institutions, but they're still trying to figure out what that means in terms of finance, as is UK. What I will say is that Kazakhstan qualifies for the European grant funding in the same way as a European country. So if we were to look at applying for grants for, Horizon 2020 grants for analysing our rare earths deposit as an example, we could apply for those grants. So that access is there, which is great. But they're all, compared to the Inflation Reduction Act in the UK, in the US, they all pale in comparison. I mean, the checks that the USA is writing is huge. So they're really front running this, which is fantastic to see. UK and EU have a long way to go to catch up.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. But let me give the final sort of thoughts here over to ECR, of course, in Australia, different jurisdiction, a different government. Mike, Nick, who wants to comment?
Yeah, look, I mean, Mark, looking at the time, I mean, you can sit all night chatting the girls up or you can blow them kisses. And I just think, we're happy blowing kisses at this point. We're not as smart as the other two, so we'll call it a day at that. I mean, honestly, you can argue your case, day and night. These small cap markets will turn a corner, and it'll be the ones that go out there and do the job rather than talk about it that'll make the difference. So, yeah.
Well, before we blow everyone kisses, Nick, it's only fair if I give you a final sign off, if you would like to.
Good to be the last to go. I think you've all made good points. The one I'd add to it is, as a management team, I think it's incumbent on us to do our homework. There's a lot of new schemes that come into play. There's different schemes in different states in Australia, different schemes in different countries. And it was interesting being at Resourcing tomorrow. Yeah, I learned quite a bit, actually, particularly about what's available in Queensland. And as I said, I think our obligation is to learn about that, do our homework, and understand how that can impact on our projects. If you're a small cap player, the difference between government support or not can make a project viable or not, as the case may be. And there's more of these schemes coming into play. And our requirement, I think, as a management team, is to make sure we understand what's available and sensibly apply whether or not those schemes can fit what we're looking to do on the ground.
Okay. Well, on that note, we'll kiss everyone good night and say thank you very much to Nick and Mike from ECR Minerals, Alex Walker from East Star Resources, and Oliver Friesen from Golden Metro Resources. And of course, thank you everyone for watching this evening. And until next time, which will probably be in the new year. So I'll take this opportunity to wish everyone happy holidays, and we'll see you again soon. But thank you everyone for joining us tonight.
Thanks for hosting. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, cheers.
If you enjoyed this interview, then give us a thumbs up, a like or a retweet. Subscribe to us on YouTube or follow us on Twitter, and hit that notification bell to be the first to know when we release new content. There's loads of great content on our website too, across all our programs at stockboxmedia.com. Thank you for watching.